What it do, Blair? How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm doing pretty well. Yeah, it's a good time at the moment. So
You're like one of the busiest producers I think I know right now. Like what a luxury it is to be busy doing theater all the time. This resounding stuff you got going on the last 5 years, the streaming production that's nominated for Drama Desk Award, right?
yeah, yeah. Being busy is a luxury and a curse in a pandemic. Like on one hand, not everyone gets to be busy at the moment. On the other hand, I've also probably stretched myself a little thin with all the things I want to do. And a lot of that came out of this idea that there was a vacuum when things shut down. And then I just started pursuing every single possible opportunity I could.
It clearly shows because how you've expanded Resounding and like what you've done with all of your past credits to get you to this point. It's funny because I should mention that literally the last time and the first time I saw you in person was 2 years ago. You were developing a musical that I was a part of, or you were interested, excuse me,
Yeah,
in
at the time.
like being part of it. Hypatia and the Heathens that
Yeah.
Leah Barcelona Tambora wrote. And I literally through this, like a little too short of a time ago, realized that you are now the lead producer on it, which is so exciting. And like I was with Leah in those stages of like looking around and helping her. And I even managed at one point to use the Access Theater. My friend had a residency in the Access Theater, and like we just tried to like give it some air and like or put it up before we got it in the caveat again for that summer. And like it is just so wonderful to see you developing a work that was like a non-union production. To see somebody from Broadway doing that, like actually ooh, it like gives me actually like so much optimism for the future of like theater.
I mean, that's the type of work that I like and the type of work that I like to do as a producer. There are different producers out there, and I think some people see it as their job to kind of say, I have this idea for a show, let me find the team and put it together. Or, I have this property that I've licensed and it would make a great play or musical. But I'm just like wandering around, finding things and being like, that, I want to support that. Let's put that on the stage. So with Hypatia and the Heathens, it was literally, that's literally how it happened. I met Leah's writing partner, Harry. He said, I'm a musical theater writer. I went, oh no, he's going to try to send me a show.
Oh God,
And then he did send me a show and I actually liked it. And,
oh no, isn't it bad when you like it? That's the worst.
It is. No, it's really hard for me to like things these days, especially because I do so much. If I like something, I either had to like take something else that I like and put it to the side,
You
or
have
I
to
had
put
to
your
say,
heart into the shit that you like.
yeah,
That's the worst
yeah,
part of it. Yeah.
yeah. So with that, it was just with the night that we met. Um, I had read the show. I had gone to a small reading that they'd done in like a weird building.
It was
Yeah.
like the equivalent of a WeWork. We got
Yes.
a basically like a WeWork room, and like
Yes.
we used the we used the whiteboard for
Yeah.
things. It was
I
like the
have to say
fact,
it's the most effective reading I've been to. Like
really.
there's yes, because there's something exciting about people doing things in a way where either they're like, let's just do it all non-traditional, or like, we don't really know what we're supposed to do, so let's just do it here, right? And I know that was put together by, I think, Nick Gray, who Leah and Harry used to work with. And, he's
Oh, you
somebody who
know
just
Nick
like,
Gray? How do
I
you know
follow
that
him on
guy?
Instagram. I just follow him on
Oh,
Instagram.
okay.
Well, like we chat, and I'm on his like email thread, and I'm kind of inspired. Like that kind of thinking inspired me because he's not a person who's in theater, but he was like, I know how
Yeah.
to get people interested in things.
Nick Gray is like, for those listening or watching, the equivalent of like one of those influencer type of people who just sort of brings people together, and is also like, he's just one of those like museum kind of guys
Yeah.
who like knows how to like integrate like nonprofit work, and he's got some good vertical integration shit going on.
Yes.
Like you talk about
Yes.
like different hands in different pots. Ooh, yeah.
Well, and that inspired me, this idea that me, somebody who actually was in theater, and I was the only person in that room, I think, who even worked in theater, right? And obviously, other than the actors and musicians, but it was just like, oh, wow. This setting, the idea that it's not a group of stodgy producers who have like taken their lunchtime to go sit in a studio, to go sit in Ripley Greer and be bored to tears by this thing that they don't want to watch anyway. Like the fact that it was a completely different setting, I think that really like it motivated me because it felt more like a performance than what we typically have as a reading.
Basically, we were all part of really like forming this musical for like a good 5 months straight. And I think what I'm trying to explain to you is how much that musical is to learn, know, and to have that like vocabulary. And for people who develop work, they understand that like having that vocabulary flow through you for so long and meditating in it and seeing those choices grow, it like is probably one of the most like important experiences I had like in a musical.
So different developing a new show, whether you're part of the cast or you're the producer. It's different than like, let's put on this script that we licensed from MTI. Like that's one thing. Doing a new show, especially something that's trying to gain some future life, is just a completely different beast. And the process of discovering Hypatia was, again, random, but also it was the logical steps that I, as a producer, would take. You know, I read the script and heard the demos and I said, great. And then I went to the first reading and I said, great. And then I went to the production at Caveat and I said, okay, it's still like, and you know, every single time I did something, my rule was it needs to feel the same way in the next step. And it needs to feel the same way in the next step. And so every step was a little bit larger and it felt the same way. And so now, let's see, I think I'm waiting for a script, or maybe they just gave me a draft that I have to read. But we're still in process. And obviously the last year has put a lot of things on hold. And also somehow my slate has become even more full because I was working on a number of shows. They were all in different places a year ago.
Yeah.
And then when everybody is suddenly in the same place and everyone's looking at me like, okay, what's next? I'm like, I don't know. Let's figure it out.
What were you working on right before the pandemic happened?
I was in a really interesting place right before the pandemic happened. I literally was in South Africa. I had gone to South Africa for a couple of reasons, but it was my second trip. I went at the end of 2019 in November just to go. A friend and I in the summer probably drank too much. We're like, we should go to South Africa. And then it was a trip. And then we had to actually do it. And then I loved it so much. I loved the country so much. And I knew that there was a pretty cool theater scene there, a very interesting theater scene. And I was also thinking of it as a place that is another English language market that's not really tapped by.
What's so interesting about their theater scene?
When we produce a show on Broadway and it's a hit, we immediately put it out on a tour, and then it gets a West End production, and then it gets an Australian production, and then it does a UK tour. But no one's ever looked at South Africa, which is a country that is English. You know, no one ever looks at it and says like, how do we make that another market? And so my question was, when shows go there, or when shows are produced there, how does it happen? And oftentimes the rights are just kind of given away. Because again, like the rights holders are not like, oh, we need to have the first class production there, but it's got beautiful theaters, a lot of theater infrastructure, a really strong scene. People are really passionate about going to theater and art in South Africa. And so I was trying to like connect the two dots between what we do here and that market and see like, is it a financial thing? Is it just like, it's too far away? It's like people don't know that the theaters exist. So I was there, and a lot of that came out of my sort of frustration with what was going on. I was really frustrated with the regional scene and the New York theater scene. I was frustrated that my work was stalled, that I wasn't really making the connections that I wanted to make, that people didn't really seem interested in what I was doing. So I was like, I'm just gonna go fly to another country and like figure it out over there. And to be honest, when I scheduled the trip, that was at the end of February. I scheduled it and I sent emails to the 4 like major theater owners and producers. Every single person got back to me in a week and said, yes, I'll have a meeting with you. If I even tried to schedule a single meeting in New York, it's like, I'll talk to you in 8 months, maybe, right? And so the fact that that was the way that people responded to me, and I was like just a tiny nobody with 1 Broadway credit, I was like, okay, cool. I definitely want to go there.
So much of our culture is so ethnocentric that we would never even consider that like the infrastructures of other industries can coexist with ours.
We export a lot of musicals, and we rarely import. And to be honest, like, we are the best at it. And that's not like, I go to the UK a lot and I'll see shows, and I always think like, okay, you get the idea of what a musical is supposed to be, but you haven't quite captured the heart. And it's just like a cultural thing, right? Like,
Interesting.
and I it's one of those things that I need to do more research into, but like the original musicals in the UK, I think really have a problem coming over to the US. And there's something about the American musical that speaks to everyone around the world the same way that opera, dance, like all these other things speak to everyone, but it doesn't necessarily happen in reverse. But I would like to see theater become more global, the way that like we're all obsessed with, so like Netflix, for all of its fault, has made us obsessed with so many things that we probably would not have cared about. And that's cool. And like, how do we do that with theater?
I knew the moment I saw like A Strange Loop, for example, which was shortly after I actually met you, funny enough. Like I just sort of knew that that was a new definition of musical theater for me. And I think it's because of shows like that and shows of like Fairview and even like Ain't No Mo, and even the Underground Railroad, that like are basically redefining how white audiences perceive theater. And because they are sort of the hegemony of like taste making, and not so much anymore, like that is what is so beautiful at this moment. It's like finally, like there is equity in the conversation. There may not be equity in equity, but there's equity in our conversation as the greater theater community. Joel Perez came on here like last week, and what he was talking about was how like the discrepancy between Broadway and the greater theater community.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say the greater theater community might be for the first time leading this conversation.
I've been yelling about that a lot recently because, there's a lot of anger and upset and calls for change, but I think so much of it is focused on Broadway that it's actually ignoring the real problem we have, which is that we have centralized all of theater, right? Every high school looks to what was on Broadway for what they're going to produce in 5 years. And yet there are people locally who are creating things that you could do, local writers, smaller writers. Like we have the internet. I feel like we have the internet is the answer to everything. When people are like, how do we do this? It's like, we have the internet. You do not have to do the show that was on Broadway. You can find any show. You can license any show. You can connect to anyone. You can ask for anything. I think the decentralization is really important. Demanding change of Broadway as if it is the only part of the theater industry, to me, is like demanding change of McDonald's.
That's exactly what Joel L. Perez said. Yes.
And I'm like, let's talk about what we can change and what we can control, what we can do. Like, if you want to open a vegan gluten-free restaurant, you can, and you can start a chain, and you can be like, this is what we want to do. Theater hasn't captured that yet. And I know that for a fact because I'm trying to do it. And I know how hard it is because so much is focused on what is happening on Broadway. When is Broadway opening? When is Broadway changing? Oh, all these Broadway producers got to go. And it's kind of scary to me because I have no idea where I fit in this conversation. Like you said, I am a Broadway producer. Like you said, people will look at me and say, oh, you're a gatekeeper. And at the same time, I'm also like, well, I agree with everything you're saying. It affects me as well. But nobody's talking, people talk in abstract about the idea of like, we want new producers, and yet those new producers are going to be in the same position and have to do the same things and make the same choices and negotiate with the same unions. So it's not as easy as just saying we want new producers. It's got to be more like, what do you want these new producers to do? And if you want them all to be on Broadway, then you're asking them to give up a certain level of independence and decision making, because I don't get to decide how much it costs to be on Broadway and what, who's in local one, and who are the equity actors, and I just do what I'm told so that I can get a theater and afford to do the thing. I don't get to decide who I get money from because it costs so much money. I kind of have to go to the people who are rich. By the way, you rich people, there's not a lot of rich people who are going around saying like, oh, well, I got all of my money by these, really great means, and I've never been involved in anything that you would disagree with, right? So I have spent a lot of time thinking like, do I want to be on Broadway anymore? Is that what is as a producer, like, is that what I'm focused on? Not really. Like, would I like to make money? Of course, so that I can continue to do my job. But would I like that to be able to go to other people as well? The cast, the crews, the designers, like everyone involved. Yes, that's what we want to create. But with Broadway, I can't do that. With Broadway, I can do one thing, and it's the same thing that everybody else is doing. So
Wow. Yeah, I definitely understand that. And the conversation around that has to really discern itself from performative allyship, which is really the danger of everything that's happened
mhm.
over the past year. Because the worst part is obviously it's not just white people at this point anymore. Um, and the theater conversations and the dialogues that have happened have been so volatile in different insidious ways that we don't understand necessarily. And I think I'm not trying to speak in abstract per se, but I'm also not trying to like comfort. I'm not like a Twitter person
Yeah,
in any way.
me
So,
neither.
but it's true. Like so many people are just posting their fucking squares and think that like that's it. And just because you share shit, that's enough. And I think about what you were saying with like, you need the rich people. Like this whole Scott Rudin debacle has like really had me fascinated lately because right after all that, after North Korea hacked us or whatever, and like dropped his emails with Amy
Yeah.
Pascal about like Obama and like Aziz Ansari or whatever, basically like using like horrible like racist language. He had to, I think, gear over to billionaires to fund his shows because they lost so much money from like individual people who lost money from like Streetcar Named Desire and shit, and they were like, we're not making this shit back. So after that, he like had to, you know, as Alexis Rose on Schitt's Creek would say, he had to go on David Geffen's yacht and like literally like get those billions. And that pretty much like funded like To Kill a Mockingbird and all the rest of that shit. And the notion of producing is so much more than following the money nowadays. And I think that's the same way for any artist. Like following your money and following your institutions is not really, it can't be your primary goal anymore. You're like, your conscience almost has to be, but I don't know, like maybe it's a little bit of both, I think.
Well, the challenge is, especially with the performative aspects of this, is it both feels good, right? Like when I say something and I feel really passionate about it, of course it feels great when people like it and retweet it. At the same time, when I see something that's sort of like sounds great but doesn't actually make any sense in the context of what we do, I'm always like, ugh, so many people liked this because they didn't really think about it. And
Yeah.
I'm like, ugh, and they shared it because it's easy to like and share without having to actually think. But I wonder if we can sustain that energy. Like eventually, in a vacuum, whether it's an institution or a single person, it is really easy to perform. It is really easy to say, I stand with, and here's my image, and here's my square, and here's what I believe, and I'm sharing this graphic. And then shows will open again, and auditions will happen again, and people will have to make a choice. And how can we make that choice when Broadway as it stands is owned by three people, three theater owners, none of who I would say any of us would look at it and be like, yeah, those are real people that we want to like trust and believe in
This
to
is
be
a
the
6 month reminder, by the way. It's Niederlander, Schubert, Jujamison, right?
I'm so excited about people being passionate about change. I'm also fearful that people are going to like get into it and be like, oh, none of this is good because none of it is good. And then when none of it's good, do we just go back to the way things are, or do we change for something new? How do we create within Broadway? I'm not sure. I can figure out a ton of ways to create to the side and above and below, and I can do that. If I wanted to put on a Broadway show next year with everything that we've been talking about and everything that we want to see, I don't know that it would happen. I think it's a 15-year plan.
When your back is against the wall, there's really nothing you could do besides do the work that the foundation that's been laid lets you do. And it's, I do think there will be a discrepancy. I really, I mean, I'm sure people of color will cringe when I say this, when they, if, or when they see this, like, I can't imagine another all white show on Broadway. I don't think that's conceivable. The last one I can think of, yeah, right. Like, but Taylor Mack with Nathan Lane and what's their fucking name? Three other actors. That was the last thing I remember that was all white on Broadway. And I think it's still possible, obviously. Like, I think there's any amount of like insidious circumventing that you could do, but you know.
I'm always a firm believer in the idea that you don't solve a problem by like trying to deal with all these symptoms, which is ultimately what we always do. And what you're going to see is that, yeah, of course, there's nobody's going to do an all white show. They're going to cast one person of color so that they don't have an all white show, right? They're going to vote because that is what people are so afraid now that they're going to get called out or called in or canceled, that the work that they're going to do is like the lowest level of work, which is let's cast some people of color so that nobody will be mad at us. But they're not going to focus on like the story. Who is the story? Why is it that this would actually default to an all white cast? And we have to like plug in a person of color, which we've been doing for years, you know, the random black girl, you know, that kind of thing. And so, yeah, cool, we'll solve that problem, but it will really be the least amount of work. And ultimately, and we all know this, is Broadway is about money, nothing else. And nonprofits are about money. They're called nonprofits, but it's literally about how do we raise the money to continue to operate. And when you have that, until we are not in this capitalist system, we all know it, we're not changing it. So when Broadway is about money, and Broadway is 60% sold to tourists, unless we want it to completely collapse, we kind of have to continue to do the things that we've been doing. The one thing that we can credit Broadway with is that the entire community both supports it, has its eyes on it, uplifts it. That doesn't happen with any other part of the theater industry. It doesn't matter what you're doing. People are just not that supportive. And it's because we need money. Like you want to put on a show and you want to have like equitable pay and you want it to feel fair. You need a lot of money. You need a lot of money to do that.
Right.
So how do we get both a lot of money, which is what Broadway is, but also not suffer from the same issues?
Well, maybe like you might know the answer to this shit. So, you know, Roundabout's whole like thing in the 70s where they found their new audience, and like those were pretty much like, those are the old white people now who like come to the theater and pretty much support Broadway. Do you have any like optimism for either finding that new group of people, maybe them being like more affluent, more dynamic audiences? And also, do you have any optimism about the industry standard group? They're like, their goal is pretty much to like decolonize the producing practices of Broadway, and that would sort of overthrow the norm.
I would say the problem with finding a new audience right now is that the costs are not lower. The cost of producing something is not lower, which means ticket prices are not lower. So how do you invite in that? When the Roundabout found that audience, the cost of producing was much lower and ticket prices were much lower. Like maybe that had more to do with who was going to the theater, not who could afford theater. Now all we have is who can afford theater, and people who can afford theater are not the people who live and work in New York City. It's people who are like, oh, I saved up all my money to go to New York and see a Broadway. And they arrive and they say, which Broadway am I seeing? That one that's a movie that I know, or that one that's a movie that I know, or maybe the one that I heard about because I heard something about the Tony Awards. So creating a new audience in that way, I don't know. I don't know how it happens, because you can't offer $20 tickets to a Broadway show. Like that can't be that can be back of the house for the last 2 rows. That can be, we did that on Slave Play. It was like $35 for every single performance had $35 ticket.
Sure.
And there are people who went to the theater for the first time.
Right. But then also your blackout nights were like probably one of the most innovative new forms of like bringing an audience to the theater. Whereas like you compare that to Hamilton and like the lack of infrastructure that was there for accessibility. The lottery is the only thing that's there, and that's not even really selling. That's not real accessibility. That's
No,
like it's a fucking lottery. It's like
it's a
actually a
lottery.
theme
Yeah,
throughout like all of Lin-Manuel Miranda's work. Like there's always a lottery, a chance to get to see me do my thing.
yeah.
But I definitely don't think that like, what about like on demand stuff? You, especially right now, are finding that audience. Like there are people that will pay literally $40 to watch the last 5 years. And I think there's like an incredible opportunity there.
It's a lottery, and we could have done that. And out of the box, that produced it along with Homedale Theater, and we took two people who have been on Broadway before, but they're not like known entities, and we took a show that people know and like and all of that, and we went with a director who'd never really done film before. We created this like amazing thing, and we put it out there. But at first, it wasn't like it was flying off the shelves. It wasn't like people were like, "Oh my gosh, I have to stream this thing." It was literally a slow crawl, word of mouth, and then the press watched it, and the press watched it, and then the New York Times decided to cover it, and then the whole thing explodes. Also, the New York Times could have been like, "We don't care," and then where would we be, right? So that's still a lottery. Like you still can't force any of it, but you have to risk everything to get there. And that's the challenge with on demand right now, because everyone's like there's no difference to people between like a virtual concert and the last 5 years and what I do with Resounding. Like people are just like, it's all stuff and none of it's theater. And then so you're like making these things, you're putting it feels like putting a movie together, right? Because you spend $120 million to put together. I was reading about like the Universal Dark Universe or whatever, the
Yeah.
Mummy. They spent $120 million and like, yeah, it's gonna be great, and we're gonna have all these other movies, and then nobody liked it, and they're like canceled, which is fine for them because they have like millions more dollars.
Right.
But when you're a solo person putting something together and you're putting your heart and soul into it, and you put it out there, and whether it's streaming or whether it was back in the day in person, it's like, oh, great, we used all of our resources to create this thing. And because the theater industry is so insular in that our press, they're not tastemakers. Our press just responds to what we've already decided is good taste, which is normally Broadway, sometimes off-Broadway, and then rarely, for whatever reason, they go and pick up something like the last 5 years. Or there's a show I saw out in Brooklyn at Jack called TJ Loves Sally Forever, and like, who knows why the Times decided to go like cover it? Who knows why? But I saw it and then I wanted to go see it, right? Like that's just luck. The show also could have just disappeared into the ether, like so many shows do, whether they are brilliant or terrible, because
Right.
there's no sense of like we have a responsibility to care about everything everyone's doing. That also has to do with the fact that we are all competing against each other at all times. And we all, once you're done competing, you start making your own thing. And when you're making your own thing, everyone kind of looks like at you like, meh, I want to make my own thing. Also, like, good for you, right? It's like, yeah, nice, you made a thing. It's like, but I made this for us, and it's like, yeah, okay, you know. So we have
Yes.
to stop that. We have to like we collectively, we the people, have to decide where we're going to focus our energy, because right now we're still focusing all of our energy on Broadway. So where is it going to be? And if we can do that, we can build something new up. If we said, let's support off-Broadway now, we could build that up to be the thing that it used to be. But until people decide that, it's not going to happen.
But when you say off Broadway, there's like already like a commercial off Broadway that's like essentially Broadway, right? So
Well,
like,
yeah, it's even worse because it's like not even shows. It's just like what is the minimal viable product that will get like a family of four in the door? Something with bubbles. And like some of the shows are great, but that is the only way that you survive off Broadway, is being able to sell enough tickets to enough people who do not care, because you're not going to be in the Times, you're not going to be in the Tony Awards. You just got to be like, come to the thing, it's shiny, it's great, and they're like, yeah, okay, we're here.
we can't just invest in McDonald's. We need to invest in our local businesses. And I think that that's harder to do, right? Because the revenue that comes out of local businesses isn't something that is just so streamlined from like some like bigwigs perspective.
If you're a members of Actors Equity, you cannot really ever be a producer. Like, you're not meant to ever be a producer, right? And the standards that equity sets for their members also prevent you as like a member of that union from going and be like, I'm going to put on a Broadway show. Literally impossible. But that's how people reclaim power. That's how people make the rules. When you're your own boss, you make the rules, right? So because of the competition between the like greedy producers, producers are like a caricature now. Like there's only two ways that people think of it. They think of David Merrick, they think of Scott Rudin, and they literally think of the movie The Producers, right? Like that's it. But actually, like most producers are actors who are trying to make their own work. People like me who are like, I'm not talented. I just want to be involved in theater. Or people who just like fell into it because nobody else was buying the like gaff tape that you need, or putting the marketing together, or, you know, doing the books. That's what most producers are. Most producers are just people who are trying to help. The ones that we all think about are like the 5 guys who can go and get a Broadway theater. So no, actors are not those people.
Well, isn't that kind of like the closest thing I could think of to that is like what Tectonic Theater Project does, and like what a lot of those like actors who like go places and tell the stories of the people they spoke to and like literally reenact it. Like that's the closest thing to that. But I don't think that's exclusive to documentary theater. I think you're right. I mean, look at the Mad Ones, for example. Like they managed to find their way into Playwrights Horizons with that show they did a couple of years ago. And honestly, like the direction that a lot of theaters are going, specifically like in conversations with, what that theater in Chicago, the something with a V, they all ultimately decided, I think it's just a collective of people make the decisions.
You have the internet, right? Like maybe that is streaming. Maybe that is the new frontier of how we circumvent the Broadway. And I've said that about new shows that I'm producing all the time. If I went and recorded a new show and put it out on a stream on YouTube for free, and a bunch of like people found it, eventually what would happen is it would become so popular that then a Broadway, you know, theater owner would be like, why aren't you bringing the show here, right? Like that's the thing that you need to create. And we've seen it with shows like, I think about like, I call it like the Tumblr ranking of musicals, which is like God. Heathers,
right?
Beetlejuice,
Be More Chill.
Be More Chill, like Hadestown. And those are not like the Tony Award-winning best musicals necessarily. Those are
and
not
honestly,
like
bro, Slave
musicals.
Play too.
Well, half of them closed like early, like Beetlejuice, you know. But what it says is that people who are not here, people like they don't care what's in the 41 theaters. They care about what they like. And those things can actually motivate us and move us. Look, when people can open a coffee shop, even with Starbucks and Dunkin' Donuts in existence in New York City, there should be different types of theater for different types of people. And we have that, but it's still so like Broadway, and then everything else is in relation to Broadway, which is annoying, right? Like off Broadway. How about not off anything? How about just be our own theater and not off, which just makes you sound like a really cheap knockoff. Like we should be able to, like I'm producing theater in Astoria, right? And it feels like, oh, I don't know what that is. That's so far away from Broadway.
Broadway's too big for his britches is the problem. Like that's why these subscription models from off-Broadway theaters, which aren't perfect by any means in terms of accessibility to people, but they're able to come back sooner than fucking Broadway because they're not paying the rent of like a state landmark. Right. And literally people are not gonna sit next to each other for a very, very long time in a theater. Yeah. I can't conceive that, but I have a little producer question for you that you might know the answer to. With a show like Beetlejuice, one of these like Tumblr pics of musicals, how did Scott Rudin get the ability to just overthrow all that? Was it because they weren't making the money they made during the Tonys and he had the backing for Music Man? Like, fuck is that?
So when you essentially sign a lease with the theater owner, there is a certain dollar amount that if you are not above that dollar amount, they can revoke your lease. They can kick you out of the theater. So what happened with Beetlejuice, and I don't know the exact order of operations, except for that there was a moment in like spring or early summer where they went below the stopgap. That's what it's called. And they went below it. And I don't know if it was at that moment or if it was later on. that the theater owner was like, okay, like we'll let you go until X date. Or if maybe they didn't care, maybe it was like, okay, we'll see what happens, right? Like all the backroom stuff. But essentially, when Scott Rudin decided with the Music Man that he wanted to go into the Winter Garden, the theater owner was able to reference the stopgap and say, because you hit that 6 months ago, we have the ability to take you out of the theater. The problem was Beetlejuice had a very, very, very slow crawl to become one of the highest grossing shows. So that probably put them in a very, very awkward position. Because yeah, in the early part of the run, they were like, this show's not going to last. And then Tumblr kids made it a thing, and TikTok made it a thing, and suddenly it was making the money it needed to make. But because at one point they had gone below that stopgap, that was the opening they needed. And I imagine that they got on the phone and Scott Rudin was yelling at somebody and saying like, I want this fucking theater, and like get them out of there. And eventually they acquiesced, because as much money as Beetlejuice was making, Hugh Jackman and Sutton Foster and the Music Man was going to make more.
Yeah, I guess they were going to get more money for less time, because that shit was not going to stay on. It wasn't an original musical. It was a revival. So it was going to be there for like a year less probably. And then like they were not going to lose as much money as they would lose in the stopgap, I guess, or something like that.
First of all, Scott Rudin's on the other end of this deal. So it didn't matter what anybody wanted. All that mattered was what he wanted.
Right.
And if there was one thing that he could force, he was going to force it. So if he knew that Beetlejuice had hit that point and that technically they could be kicked out, he was going to kick them out. And he was going to say the Music Man is going to make X amount of dollars. Even if Beetlejuice runs for another 2 years based off of TikTok kids, I'll be bringing in $2 million plus with the Music Man. So you do the math, right? And it'll run and run, and it'll be the Music Man, and it'll be blah, blah, blah. And they acquiesced. Or
Yeah.
they thought it was the right choice. Either way, they used a clause that was, while valid, no longer really making any sense.
How big could you make the Music Man though? Why do you need that that drives me crazy. I'm done talking about this shit. I'm not gonna keep putting you through this. Let's talk about this last 5 years, man. Oh my God. I'm about to watch it this weekend and I'm very excited, but I've literally only heard incredible things. How did you get involved in this? And a question you could answer down the line afterwards is, how do more people get the ability to put on plays and musicals in the comfort of their own home without worrying about ownership? That's fucking insane. Is that you?
Well, I can tell you, it was going to be in a theater, and it was just going to be like this really great
What
production
theater?
in a theater. So the producing partner was the Holmdel Theater in New Jersey, and originally it was going to actually take place in that theater.
Right. Okay.
And it was I was doing the work of connecting with directors, and it was Shelley Williams who we had a call with, and Shelley said, she said, I think the phrase was, empty theaters make me sad. And I was like, yeah, you're right. And she was suggested, like, do it in an apartment. And we're like, that's a great idea. And then Shelley is very, very busy. Obviously, like, she's in all of these different groups, and she's directing Aida and blah, blah, blah. And she was like, yeah, here's the idea, but like, go ahead, I can't do it. And Jason Michael Webb was already the music director. And we were like, well, we got to find a director. And he put his name out there, and we were like, sure, why not? Because again, we didn't know what this thing was going to be. We were just like, here's how much money we have. And we figured out we should do it in an apartment. And that was that, right?
Right.
So I just let people do what they wanted to do. Like I found a film producer who I work with in other projects, and said, like, we need a DP, we need an assistant camera, we need a sound person, and like she went off and did all of that. Jason found this amazing band with Cynthia Meng as like the associate music director. The actors just came and did it. Everyone just did what they needed to do with like the freedom. We had the parameters, and people showed up.
Yeah.
And that's it. Like that, and that is the only way I want to produce, is like, here's the parameters. Let's show up and do the best work that we can do.
Are you the lead producer on the last 5 years?
It's all through, we're all producing partners, Out of the Box, myself and Homedell.
I'm so excited to see that you are cultivate, because you were literally, when I met you, in like it felt like a totally different place. Maybe at that point you were in those conversations with Slave Play, but like where you were then versus where you are now, I don't know. It's just incredible to
When
see.
we met, I had just decided to be a producer, like for real, be a producer. It's why I was even having the conversations about Hypatia, because I was like, okay, well, I'm tired of like working for other people, and I'm tired of doing all these things I don't like, so I should just produce my own stuff. And then I went from having no shows to having 3 shows that I'm the lead producer on, and a Broadway show which I was co-producing. So yeah, it was a time of transition, and now I'm in a very different place.
Yeah.
Because I had the last 5 years, you know, it's still very restrictive what we're able to do. We had to have tickets, and they have a certain number of tickets per performance per the union, and the rights holders still have a lot of ownership over like our responsibilities. We got very lucky because for whatever reason, MTI was like, this isn't like, because if it was a professional production in New York, we would have to jump through so many hoops to make it happen. And because it was streaming, they were sort of like, okay, whatever. Like nobody knows what streaming is and we don't care.
That is literally the agency. That is what producers that I've worked with make me feel like an incredible person. Like the thing that I had just done this past week, this thing called like Primetime Theater Festival, was a group of producers bringing in edited footage while helping the stage manager spotlight different actors, while also filming and producing commercials, fake commercials that happened in between these like commercial breaks. And it was like a play inspired sitcom series. And like it made it definitely doesn't make them feel great when I'm like, what you guys are doing is incredible. And I just like I belted at them, because there aren't many producers like them or like yourself that know the value of agency and work without like being given accolades for it. It's just very frustrating because if those people were given agency at higher levels to give that same agency to artists, we would be in like a fucking utopia at this point.
Yeah, I mean, yes, it would be utopia, and it's probably not that easy, right? Because the second you step into the other realms, you learn new things, you discover why it's so hard. But it's possible. It requires everyone to focus on it and try and make it happen, and we all need to be moving in the same direction. And I hope we do.
I think we've learned a lot over the past year, and I think we're going to be able to bring out what we've learned and unlearned into the room, and hopefully leave what we've unlearned out of the room. That is obviously the greatest goal of all. So the last 5 years, by this new up and coming composer named Jason Robert Brown. He squeezed his way in the door. He was an intern, and it's streaming until May 9th at Out of the Box Theatrics' website, ootbtheatrics.com. Word. And then after that, you are also producing Resounding live.
Yes.
And this is literally just a beautiful clusterfuck of incredible theater projects. We have the Tempest from May 7th to 8th.
Yeah.
In Radial Park.
Sesame Street, Sonia Manzano. She played Maria for many, many years on Sesame Street. And it is an adaptation that's meant to introduce people who are new to Shakespeare and younger audiences to Shakespeare. So we were sort of like, who better to teach us about Shakespeare than the person who taught us to read? And we have a show every weekend until May 23rd. We have a remount of our show we've done, Treasure Island, with Rob McClure and his wife Maggie Lakis in the lead roles. And then we are doing a concert version of Triassic Park, the musical. It's been updated to 2021.
What on earth is Triassic Park?
So my partner at Resounding, Steve Wargo, is a writer and director, and he wrote the musical Triassic Park. And I think it appeared in like NIMS in 2011, 2012. We're calling it the 9th anniversary concert in concert. So that would be 2012. And Triassic Park is the story of Jurassic Park from the perspective of all the female dinosaurs before one of them grows a dick. Can I say that on here? grows a
Yeah.
dick, and because they had too much fish DNA,
Oh
and
my
how
God.
they reckon with that. So all the actors are dinosaurs, and the original Off-Broadway cast has coming back to do the show again. Lindsay Nicole Chambers, Alex Wise, Wade McCullum, a great group of people is coming back to
Wow.
sing this ridiculous show about dinosaurs.
Well, I'm glad I asked because I'm definitely gonna check that out. And can you like just clarify, are these shows going to be like something you can watch or it's something you can listen to?
So we have live performances out in Radial Park. The cast will be live on stage in front of you. And we have a giant screen that blows up. And for people, because it's like an amphitheater, we have picnic tables and then drive-in spaces. So we'll have the big screen. And when you go to the park, you get a pair of like special headphones that you put on. And what we do is we remix the sound into immersive 3D sound. So, I'm sure we'll sneak in the like classic Jurassic Park dinosaur sound breathing down the back of your neck. And then also you can just listen from home. So there's no visuals when you're at home, but you just get to listen and like close your eyes and imagine. And we were really like, the reason we started this is because we basically said, I don't want to look at anything anymore. Like I want to be able to like to see a show, but also just like drink and like close my eyes and turn off the lights after a long day of being on Zoom. And so we invented this thing just to have that. So you can come out to the park, have a picnic, watch the actors like act their faces off at their little socially distanced stands, or you can listen from home and just enjoy the sounds of the shows. And that happens live. So we're broadcasting simultaneously.
To clarify your question, can you curse? I 100% will attend this. I think this might be like the first in-person show I see, because I'm gonna be in Queens already on May 7th. And like if the Tempest is like right fucking there, why wouldn't I go?
I don't
That
know.
is
Tell your friends.
okay, I will.
I don't think people know that they have permission to go out and make theater and do theater and see theater yet.
They have no idea. They literally don't.
People need to be reminded that we're allowed to do the things we want to do. We don't need de Blasio telling us the world's going to open on July 1st or whatever. Like, theater is open. Again, go see The Office parody. I haven't seen it. I don't know if it's good, but you know what? Go fucking see it, because they were like, we're going to take a risk. Nobody's doing theater, and we're going to do theater.
You all should go check out the Resounding shows at Radial Park. May 7th through 8th is The Tempest. May 14th through the 15th is Treasure Island. And Triassic Park, the musical, is going to be up from May 21st to 23rd. You can still check out, like I said, the last 5 years until May 9th. And I want to keep talking to you, obviously, but I respect you too much to just like keep you here while like you indulge me. Thank you so much, Blair. This was so dope. I really thank you for coming on.
Thanks for inviting me. Yeah.